Hey guys, JMN here. Welcome to my video. Today we will talk about Dir En Grey and their new best of compilation, Vestige of Scratches. As you may know, I have quite some history with Dir En Grey. The music video for Saku was my very first experience with Japanese music, and the albums Withering to Death and The Marrow of a Bone were the start for my journey into visual kei music. I was obsessed with the band for quite a while and even created the YouTube channel World of Dir En Grey, where I uploaded a lot of rare Dir En Grey footage. Back at the time I also created the blogspot site World of Dir En Grey, where I gathered information about their early days, especially their indie days, their rare recordings and also their previous band activities. Going through this compilation was also a nostalgic trip through my own experience with the band. Worth to mention that Dir En Grey already released two best of compilations called Decade. If I recall correctly, these albums were rushed out to support Dynamite Tommy, who was the owner of their home label Free Will. Back in September 2007 he was arrested for fraud activities, which involved false orders for material for Dir En Grey. Naturally the Decade CDs were pretty bland and just some kind of single compilation, which didn't feature any bonus content. This makes Vestige of Scratches the very first proper best of compilation in the history of the band. We will check it out together right after the intro. As always, we will start with the general release informations. Vestige of Scratches was released on the 2nd of January by the mentioned Free Will Records. The tracklist features 3 discs with a total of 44 remastered songs. This adds up to a massive playtime of over 3 hours and 20 minutes. The final track of each of the CDs was re-recorded for this compilation. There's also a limited edition which features an exclusive band documentary and one-shot studio performances of their re-recordings. There wasn't any announcement from the Western distribution partners, so you will have to use import shops like CD Japan or order from Japanese Amazon. Strangely enough, I couldn't find any digital downloads. Not sure if it will appear on iTunes or Amazon later. Right at the start I want to point out that I won't do an extensive comparison between these versions and the originals. These tracks were advertised as remastered versions, but I don't have the professional audio equipment to make a proper judgment on actual sound improvements. I assume they are mostly the same, besides some general volume adjustments for a more coherent listening experience. Please let me know in the comments if you found any fundamental differences. Also, I didn't look if the selection was actually based on the album or the single versions of these songs. As you may know, songs like Kakeshisa 2 or Clever Sleazoid had quite a different sound on their single versions and were also partially re-recorded for the albums. With this out of the way, we can finally talk about the music. The first disc focuses on their early recordings, which are generally seen as their classic visual kei phase. Their indie days with their promo videos like Kaete If Trends or Mosu Kaku Kaikeki were completely ignored. It also skips their first mini-album Missa and starts with their debut single Isle instead. As you may know, this track never appeared on any studio album. Vestige of Scratches continues with 4 of the essential lead singles from their debut album Goes. This choice seems a bit too safe. In my opinion, tracks like Schwein no Isu or Matsuhist of Decadence should have been considered for their nostalgic status. The CD continues with 3 tracks from their second album Macabre, which may have been the most ambitious work from their old school visual kei days. The famous singles Taiyo no Ao and Miyaku were obvious no-brainers, but it's also nice to see Ryu, also known as Wake, as the third track. You could make an argument for Daiti or Sakuru, but the band has to work with the limited disc space. However, the absence of Hydra is a fatal mistake in my opinion. The song was a stable favorite for many years. At first I thought they may go with the re-recorded version called Hydra 666 from the Dosing Green singer, but this song is also missing on the tracklist. Next we got Ain't Afraid to Die, which is still one of the best half ballads ever written by Dir En Grey. I secretly wish for a rework because it would be pretty interesting to hear a version in their current style. If I recall correctly, the song didn't really fit in the concept of their third album, so it is only available as a standalone single. Speaking of the third album, we got 2 tracks from Kiso. Filth won't surprise anyone, but Mushi is an interesting choice over tracks like Embryo, Karasu or Bottom of Death Valley. This leads to another fatal oversight. Neither the original nor the re-recorded version of the ballad Undecided was included. The disc ends with a re-recorded version of Fukai, which was a B-side from their Kasumi single. This version stays true to the original and captures the spirit of their vulgar era. Of course you can hear some improvements in regard of Kyo's modern vocal delivery. I have to say, I enjoyed this version quite a lot. Disc number 2 starts with Jessica, which was another popular single from Kiso. Afterwards we transition into Dir En Grey's infamous nu metal era, which was the starting point for many new fans like me. Sadly, the 6 Ugly EP was completely ignored. I totally expected Mr. Newsman on here. The 4th album, Vulgar, is still one of my all-time favorites by Dir En Grey, and it got represented by the singles Childbray and Train Away. For the album tracks, we got Umbrella and Audience Killer Loop. I'm especially satisfied with the inclusion of Audience Killer Loop because it has always a special place in my heart. It's hard to describe my feelings for this song, but it just captures this perfect dark atmosphere with Kyo's haunting vocals and a mesmerizing bass line. Most of the other essential tracks from this album were covered in the 3rd disc with a number of re-recordings, so the only thing missing in my opinion is Shokubeni. I would have loved to hear the re-recorded version. We continue with 4 tracks from Withering to Death, which was the breakthrough album for Dir En Grey to the Western world. With C, Saku, Dead Tree and Koto, there isn't much room for complaints. These songs perfectly represent the huge diversity of this album. I'm just disappointed that there isn't Merciless Cult. I may have said this in some of my other videos, but this track will always remain the very best song in their entire history. It is close to perfection and has this very unique, captivating aura surrounding it. After randomly thrown in Dosing Green, we come to their very controversial album, The Marrow of a Bone. This may be their most Western influenced album to date, with an extensive amount of English lyrics and further nu metal and metalcore influences. Also, the production quality was a mess, and this may have been the biggest challenge for the remastering of these songs. I feel like there are some improvements, but the guitars still sound crunchy and the drums feel a bit flat. I like to call this album their personal Saint Angel for a reason. For the song selection, we got the singles Agitated Screams of Maggots and Clever Sleazoid. Namame Kashiki may be the biggest surprise here. I thought Conceived Sorrow would be the obvious ballad choice, but this one works well too. We could argue about other inclusions like The Deeper Wildness or Repetition of Hatred, but these are just my personal preferences. I feel like The Marrow of a Bone doesn't receive nearly as much attention as it deserves. I think it would be really interesting to hear an expanded and remastered version somewhere in the future. Beside the previously mentioned Dosing Green, we got 2 more tracks from their Ouroboros album with the ballad Ware Yami Tote and their progressive masterpiece Winshuka. Ouroboros was an eye-opener for many people, and it showed the metal world that Dir En Grey weren't only about the shock factor and Japanese weirdness. This album is very complex and it can't be given justice with just 3 tracks. I still think these 3 picks are a solid choice to introduce the album. Maybe I would have included songs like Red Soil, Reiketsu Narisepa or Inconvenient Ideal, but once again, this is just my opinion. To finish this disc, we go back to their Vulgar album. Dir En Grey re-recorded 3D Empire, which was a staple during their nu metal era, especially on their initial overseas tours. For me, this song was always a mess. I like the opening signature melody and the main riffs, but Kyo's rap vocals were all over the place. I always felt like this track was a leftover from the 6 Ugly mini album where they tried to reinvent their sound for the first time. Honestly, there are only a few live recordings where they managed to convincingly transform the studio version to the stage. The re-recording doesn't sound bad, but it also left me unimpressed. For example, I'm not really a fan of this high-pitched vocal bridge. It seems totally out of place and was done way better on the original. I think they should have taken the artistic freedom to rework this track right from the core. We finally arrive at the last disc, which starts with a bunch of remakes. First we got Kiri to Mayu from the Rinkaku single. It originally appeared on their Misa mini album and was well arranged in the modern and heavy Dir En Grey style. With Zen we got a deathcore rework of this band classic, which will always remain as one of their most aggressive tracks in their entire discography. Next we got a doom metal remake of Tsumi to Batsu, which was first released as the censored version Tsumi to Kisai on their Different Sense single. The uncensored version was later released in digital form as well as a limited live distributed single. Rasetsu Koku was originally a reworked bonus track for their limited edition of Doom Spiro Sparrow, and it became a popular encore for many live shows during that era. While these first tracks were mostly driven by Kyo's harsh growls, the following Kasumi from their The Unraveling mini album takes a more traditional approach and pays respect to the original from their Vulgar album. With Obscure we got a legendary B-side from their Lotus single. This version spawned endless discussions among their fan base. Some fans prefer the original version, while others enjoy the heavier style of the remake. In my opinion, both versions are equally good and each marks an important step in Dir En Grey's history. With the final we got another rework from their Unraveling mini album. I still think that Kyo's vocals sound a bit uninspired here and they lack the pure emotional power of the original. However, I enjoy the twists to the basic riffs and also the tasteful guitar solo. It definitely adds some depth to their live performances. We move on to their 8th album, Doom Spiro Sparrow, which is considered their masterpiece by many people. The avant-garde-esque sound filled with progressive elements and a new level of brutality opened the doors for many new listeners. I have to admit, at the time of the release the sound was a bit too much for me, but after many rotations it started to click on me and I learned to appreciate the weirdness of tracks like The Blossoming Beelzebub. Sadly they only included the 3 singles Hakishisa 2, Lotus and Different Sense, which are the most conventional tracks on the whole album. There are so many great tracks like Amon, Dreambox, Vanitas or Ruten no 2 left out that I would call this selection the worst representation of any album on this compilation. After this disappointment we got 4 tracks from their latest album Archer, which was another important step in their career. Dir En Grey returned to a less complex sound with fewer deathcore elements, while still adding an artistic touch to their songwriting. For this album they went with the tracks Rinkaku, Sustain the Untruth and Revelation of Mankind, which are all known from their respective music videos. In terms of album tracks we got a fantastic en deux and I don't have a problem with this choice. Sure, they could have chosen songs like Chain Repulsion or Phenomenon, but those are just my personal favorites. Overall, these tracks are a nice introduction to the album. Before the CD ends we got their latest single Utafumi, which has yet to see an album release. At last, we got a very big surprise. I don't remember Beautiful Dirt being a prominent track from their discography. Sure, they played it live during their Rivering to Death and The Marrow of a Bone era, but I don't recall it being a famous fan favorite. I won't complain though, because I always enjoyed this song. The re-recording was well done and stays true to the original. Kyo replicates some voice colors which we didn't hear since Rivering to Death, and this gives me quite some chills. The instrumental part is on point and I can't tell at all which version I would prefer. I have to say that Vestige of Scratches was a great trip through the history of Dir En Grey. I enjoyed the nostalgia and it was fun to revisit some of their older songs. The tracklist seems pretty convincing, apart from this, as I mentioned, disappointing Dum Spiro Sparrow section. At least they considered the general opinion. Back at the time before they started working on this compilation, they actually reached out to their fans and asked on social media for their favorite and most iconic Dir En Grey songs. Maybe they should have gone one step further and increased the size of this compilation by one additional disc. This way they could have also included some of their rare tracks like the Stalin cover Warsaw no Gensu or the Der Langer tribute Easy Make Easy Mark. All in all, I was pretty satisfied with this tracklist. Also, the 3 re-recordings were well done and I like the fact that they stick close to the originals. Sure, they could have done the same approach as they did with songs like Tsumi to Batsu or Kiri to Mayu, but on this compilation it makes totally sense that they keep the original song structures. 3D Empire is the only track for me which couldn't reach the quality level of the previous version. After discussing all those points, it is time for my final prediction. It's quite hard to rate such a massive release, especially with the historic value attached to these tracks. In the end, I decided to give Vestige of Scratches a grade 9 out of 10. This comes from a diehard fan who has a really hard time to criticize his favorite band. Throughout this video, I pointed out some weaknesses which prevented me from giving this a perfect score. I still think this is an amazing best-of album and it should be a great introduction to the artist. At the moment, this is definitely the best starting point within that discography. Meanwhile, older fans can just pick up this album and dwell in their old memories like I did. All that's left to say is, I really hope they keep going strong like they did in this past 20 years. This being said, we already came to the end of this review. I hope you enjoyed this video and if you did, please leave me a like and make sure to discuss the compilation in the comment section. As always, for more content about Japanese music, you can subscribe to this channel or follow me on social media like Twitter, Facebook or Reddit. If you want to go the extra mile, you can also support me on Patreon. Every donation is appreciated, but it isn't a must. Shout out to my first Patreon, Pat. Also make sure to check out some of my other videos like these two for example. Thanks again for watching and have a great day.